She is unstable. She is mentally incompetent. She is a drifter with no husband, no career. And she lives in a shoebox apartment. My father, Richard, was screaming so loud that veins were bulging in his neck, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He pointed a shaking finger at me across the courtroom. Look at her, Your Honor. She cannot even speak. She needs a conservator to manage her trust fund before she blows it all on whatever unstable people spend money on. I sat in absolute silence, my hands folded calmly in my lap, checking the time on my watch. 10:02 a.m. Right on schedule. Judge Sullivan stared at him over her glasses, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward and asked a single, chilling question. You really don't know who she is, do you? At the next table, my father's attorney, Bennett, froze mid-motion. His eyes locked on a document the bailiff had just handed him. The color drained from his face so fast I thought he might faint. Before I tell you what the judge revealed that made my father's face turn ghost white, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I'd love to know who's part of our community. The silence in that mahogany-paneled room wasn't empty. It was heavy, pressurized, vibrating with the kind of tension that comes right before a dam breaks. I didn't look at my father. I didn't give him the satisfaction of seeing a single tear or a tremble in my lip. Instead, I looked at the dust motes dancing in the shaft of sunlight hitting the defense table, and I let my mind drift back to Christmas Eve, just 4 months ago. We were sitting at the long dining table in his house, the house I was secretly paying the mortgage on. Richard had laughed, actually laughed, when I handed him my new business card. He tossed it onto the tablecloth like it was a used napkin. A consultant? He'd sneered, swirling his expensive scotch. Is that what we're calling unemployed these days, Layla? It's a cute little hobby, sweetheart, but let's be real. You're playing pretend. I remembered the heat rising in my cheeks that night. The familiar sting of being the disappointment, the failure, the invisible daughter. But sitting here in court, that memory didn't hurt. It felt like fuel, because while he was mocking my cute little hobby between bites of roast beef, he didn't know that my hobby had just secured a $15 million federal contract to audit a corrupt pharmaceutical supply chain. He saw a drifter. I saw the CEO of Vanguard Holdings, a forensic accounting firm that specializes in hunting down money that doesn't want to be found. And right now, the money I was hunting was his. She is catatonic, Richard shouted, pulling me back to the present. Look at her. She hasn't said a word. She's obviously medicated, or having some kind of episode. I demand full conservatorship immediately. I adjusted my cuff, feeling the cool metal of my watch against my wrist. Let him scream. Let him paint me as the fragile, broken little girl who couldn't keep a husband or a steady address. It was part of the plan. If I defended myself now, if I argued back, I'd just be the rebellious daughter fighting her dad. But silence? Silence made him look unhinged. Silence let him dig his grave so deep he'd never climb out. He attacked my living situation next. She lives in some rundown rental downtown. She refuses to let family visit because she's ashamed of how she lives. It's probably a squalor. I suppressed a smile. He was talking about the Meridian. He was right about one thing I didn't let him visit, but he was wrong about the rest. I didn't live in a rundown rental. I lived in the penthouse. And more importantly, I didn't just rent there. I owned the building. In fact, I owned the building he was renting his office space in. I evicted 3 tenants last month for late payments. And my father, the great legal mind, the titan of industry, didn't even realize his landlord's signature on the eviction warnings was mine. Bennett, his lawyer, was sweating now. He was frantically tapping on his tablet, scrolling through the document the bailiff had handed him. I knew exactly what he was reading. It was a summary of assets, not my grandmother's assets. Mine. I wasn't here to fight for an inheritance. I didn't need my grandmother's money. I made more in a quarter than my father had made in his entire career. I was here because he had tried to take my freedom. He had tried to use the legal system, the very system I dedicated my life to mastering, to erase me. And now, he was about to find out that the unstable drifter he'd bullied for 29 years was actually the shark swimming in the deep end of his pool. I looked up, meeting Judge Sullivan's eyes. She gave me the smallest nod. It was time. The trap was set. Now, we just had to let him walk right into it. Judge Sullivan was flipping through the pages of the financial dossier Bennett had provided, the rhythmic swish-snap of the paper the only sound cutting through my father's heavy breathing. Richard was still posturing, adjusting his tie, looking at the gallery as if he were a gladiator who had just slain a beast. He didn't realize the beast was actually the bank. And the bank was sitting 5 feet away from him, wearing a navy blazer and a look of absolute boredom. I closed my eyes for a second, not to hide, but to remember. I needed to recall exactly why I was doing this. I needed to remember the day the ledger opened. 2 years ago, Richard's firm was bleeding out. I knew because I'd hacked his accounts, not that it required much hacking. His password was Richard1, the number 1. Because he truly believed he was the center of the universe. He was 3 months behind on payroll and drowning in high-interest loans. He needed a lifeline. A normal father would have asked his family for help. A humble man would have downsized. Richard did neither. Instead, he tried to have me committed. It was a Tuesday. I remembered the date because it was the same day I'd closed a massive audit for a tech giant. 2 officers had shown up at my door with a 5150 involuntary psychiatric hold order. My father had forged a statement from a doctor, a friend from his golf club, claiming I was a danger to myself, that I was delusional, that I was burning through my inheritance on imaginary businesses. He wanted to lock me away for 72 hours, so he could file an emergency motion to take control of my trust fund. He didn't want to save me. He wanted to liquidate me, to pay his office rent. The officers had left after 5 minutes. One look at my clean apartment, my calm demeanor, and the federal badges of the agents I was on a conference call with, was enough to prove the report was malicious. I didn't press charges then. That would have been too quick. Too merciful. Instead, I decided to become the solution to his problem and the architect of his nightmare. I created Vanguard Holdings the next morning. A shell company with a vague name and a registered agent in Delaware. Through Vanguard, I approached his bank. I offered to buy out his toxic debt. The bank was thrilled to offload a failing client. I bought his loans, his credit lines, everything. Then, I injected a fresh $650,000 into his firm under the guise of a private equity angel investor. Richard didn't ask questions. He didn't vet Vanguard. He just saw 6 figures land in his account and assumed the world had finally recognized his genius. And what did he do with the money I gave him? Did he pay his staff? Did he upgrade his outdated legal software? No. He bought a vintage Porsche 911 in slate gray. I remembered watching him pull up to Thanksgiving dinner in that car, revving the engine, boasting about his record-breaking quarter. He sat at the head of the table, carving the turkey, and looked right at me. "Maybe if you applied yourself, Layla," he'd said, wine staining his teeth, "you wouldn't be such a financial burden on the family legacy. It's embarrassing, really. At your age, needing handouts." I had smiled and eaten my potatoes. I was driving a 5-year-old sedan. He was driving a car paid for by the burden sitting to his left. He thought he was the king of the castle. But he didn't check the deed. He didn't read the loan terms. He didn't know that every mile he put on that Porsche was depreciating an asset that already belonged to me. "Your Honor." Richard's voice snapped me back to the courtroom. He was leaning on the podium now, regaining his confidence. "We are wasting time. My daughter clearly has no assets, no income, and no grasp on reality. This silence, it's a defense mechanism. She's terrified because she knows she's nothing without my support." I looked at him. Really looked at him. He wasn't a monster. He was just a bad investment. And today, I was closing the account. Bennett, his lawyer, finally looked up from the documents. His hands were shaking so bad the papers rattled against the table. He leaned over and whispered something urgent into Richard's ear. Richard swatted him away like a fly. "Not now, Bennett. I'm making a point." "You might want to listen to him, Mr. Caldwell," Judge Sullivan said. Her voice was ice. She held up a single sheet of paper, the summary of Vanguard Holdings' ownership structure. "Because according to this, the plaintiff isn't just your daughter. She's your boss." My father didn't gasp. He didn't stutter. He laughed. It was a wet, ugly sound that bounced off the wood paneling, stripping away the last shred of dignity he had left. He shook his head, looking at Judge Sullivan with the kind of condescending pity usually reserved for a confused child. "My boss?" Richard chuckled, smoothing his tie. "Your Honor, I don't know what forgery she slipped into your docket, but this is exactly what I'm talking about. Delusions of grandeur. It's a symptom of her condition. Layla doesn't run a company. Layla can barely run a toaster." Bennett, his lawyer, made a sound like a dying animal. He grabbed Richard's sleeve, his knuckles white. "Richard," he hissed, his voice trembling so hard it was audible 3 rows back. "Stop. Look at the seal. This is a federal incorporation document. It's real. You need to sit down." Richard ripped his arm away. "Get off me, Bennett. I'm not going to sit down while my daughter makes a mockery of this court." He turned back to the judge, his confidence morphing into aggression. He pointed a finger at me again, jabbing the air. "Look at her. Look at that cheap suit. Look at those scuffed shoes. Does that look like a CEO to you? She buys her clothes from discount bins. She drives a sedan with a dent in the bumper. Successful people don't live like refugees, Your Honor." I glanced down at my shoes. He was right. They were scuffed. I'd scuffed them climbing through a warehouse window last week to verify inventory for a client. I didn't replace them, because I didn't care. Unlike Richard, I didn't need to wear my net worth on my feet. She lives in the Meridian, Richard shouted, thinking he was delivering the killing blow. That crumbling brick pile downtown. I've seen the address on her mail. She lives in a studio apartment in a building that probably has rats in the walls. And you want me to believe she owns Vanguard Holdings? She can't even afford a doorman. I bit the inside of my cheek to keep my expression flat. The Meridian. He called it a crumbling brick pile. I called it a historic restoration project, and he was right about the rats when I bought the building 6 months ago. There were rats. I hired the exterminators. I hired the contractors. I renovated the lobby, and I took the entire top floor for myself. He thought I was a tenant in Unit 4B. He didn't know 4B was just the mail drop I kept to throw him off the scent. This is a waste of taxpayer money, Richard sneered, slamming his hand on the podium. She is unstable. She is alone. No husband, no children, no legacy. Just a sad, lonely girl making up stories. Sign the conservatorship order, Your Honor. Let me get her the help she needs before she embarrasses this family any further. He stood there, chest heaving, triumphant. He thought he'd won. He thought he'd exposed me. He didn't realize that by insulting the crumbling brick pile, he had just insulted his own landlord. Judge Sullivan slowly took off her reading glasses. She didn't look angry anymore. She looked bored. And that was so much worse. Mr. Caldwell, she said, her voice quiet and dangerously calm. I am going to give you 10 seconds to sit down and shut your mouth, because if you say one more word about the plaintiff's mental state, I will hold you in contempt so fast your head will spin. Richard opened his mouth to argue, but Bennett physically yanked him into his chair. Good, the judge said. She picked up the next document in the stack. Now that we've established your opinion, let's look at the facts, because, according to this deed, the crumbling brick pile you just mentioned, she doesn't just live there. Judge Sullivan slid a single piece of paper across the polished wood. It stopped mere inches from my father's trembling hand. The Meridian, she said, her voice devoid of emotion. Unit 4B is indeed a mail drop, Mr. Caldwell. You were right about that. But Miss Caldwell doesn't rent it. She owns the building, the entire building, including the commercial suites on the 3rd floor. The suites your firm currently occupies. Richard blinked. He looked at the paper, then at me, then back at the judge. His brain was misfiring. That's impossible. My landlord is a corporate entity. I pay rent to Vanguard Real Estate. I've never written a check to her. Vanguard, the judge repeated, tasting the word. She reached into the folder again. Now, that is a name that appears quite frequently in these files. Vanguard Real Estate. Vanguard Capital. Vanguard Holdings. She pulled out a thick binder, the spine cracking as she opened it. According to your firm's financial disclosures, Vanguard Holdings is your primary investor. In fact, they are the only reason your firm is still solvent. They injected $650,000 into your operating account 2 years ago. Is that correct? Richard straightened his tie, finding a shred of familiar ground. Yes. Vanguard is a private equity angel investor. They saw the potential in my firm. They recognized my legal acumen and decided to back a winner. They saved us. He sneered at me. Unlike my daughter, who wouldn't know a capital investment if it hit her in the face. Vanguard believes in me. I watched him preen. It was almost tragic. He was bragging about the rope I'd sold him to hang himself with. Vanguard believes in you, the judge echoed. She turned the binder around so he could see the incorporation documents on the first page. That is fascinating, Mr. Caldwell, because the sole incorporator, the CEO, and the primary signatory for Vanguard Holdings is Layla Caldwell. The air left the room. It didn't hiss. It vanished. Richard stared at the signature at the bottom of the page. It was my signature. The same one I'd put on his birthday cards that he threw in the trash. The same one I'd put on the lease renewal he'd signed last month without reading. No, he whispered. Then louder. No. This is a trick. This is fraud. He looked at Bennett, his face twisting into a mask of desperate arrogance. Bennett, tell her. Tell her this is illegal. She's not a lawyer. She can't own a law firm. It's against the American Bar Association rules. Rule 5.4. Non-lawyers cannot hold equity in a legal practice. This contract is void. He turned back to me, a manic grin spreading across his face. He thought he had me. He thought he'd found the loophole. You stupid girl. He laughed, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. You tried to play big shot, but you didn't do your homework. You can't own my firm. It's illegal. You just admitted to a regulatory violation in open court. I'll have you disbarred. Or whatever they do to fake accountants. He looked at the judge, triumphant. Dismiss this, Your Honor. She's not my boss. She's a fraud who broke the law to pretend she was important. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. And finally, for the first time that morning, I spoke. You're right, Richard, I said softly. I can't own your firm. I stood up. But you didn't read the contract, did you? I walked around the defense table, my heels clicking on the hardwood floor with a deliberate, steady rhythm. Bennett shrank back in his chair as I approached, clutching his briefcase like a shield. But Richard didn't retreat. He puffed out his chest, still clinging to his delusion that a technicality would save him. I didn't buy equity in your firm, Richard, I said, my voice cutting through the stale air of the courtroom. I know Rule 5.4. I memorized the ABA model rules before I even incorporated Vanguard. I stopped right in front of him, close enough to smell the stale scotch on his breath from the night before, close enough to see the sweat beading on his upper lip. I didn't invest in you, I said cold and clear. I bought your debt. I motioned to the judge, who nodded and handed me the thick file of loan agreements. I tossed it onto the table in front of him. It landed with a heavy thud. 2 years ago, you were drowning, I continued, pacing slowly. 3 banks had rejected your loan applications. You were payroll insolvent. You were about to lose your license for commingling client funds to pay your country club dues. Richard's face twitched. That was temporary. A cash flow issue. It wasn't equity, I said evenly. It was insolvency. Vanguard bought your loan, your credit line, and the lien on your equipment. Then we extended you $650,000 on a senior secured basis. Bennett flinched. He understood. I'm not your partner, Richard. I'm your senior secured creditor. I don't own your firm. I own the collateral. Every chair, every laptop, every client file belongs to me if you default. I pointed to the clause. Paragraph 12, Section B. Default on character. Insulting your guarantor in a recorded hearing triggers immediate acceleration. You called me incompetent and a fraud on the record. You defaulted. I checked my watch. The loan is due, now. Richard's face drained. I don't have that money. I know. You've got 12 grand in the bank and a maxed out card. I turned to the judge. Your Honor, I'm calling the loan. I request an enforcement order to seize assets. Bennett rose, pale. If you take the equipment, the firm dies. I accept your resignation, I said flatly. Richard finally exploded, accusing me of betrayal and plotting a takeover. Then, desperate, he grabbed his phone. I planned for this, he shouted. Server, failsafe. I'm filing Chapter 7 right now. A progress bar appeared. Liquidation, automatic stay. You get nothing. The firm is dead. He leaned back, triumphant. Checkmate. Bankruptcy protects companies, I said quietly, pulling out one last sheet. Not guarantors. Richard blinked. You signed a personal guarantee. Paragraph 4. Section C. Cross-collateralization. If the business goes bankrupt, the debt transfers to your personal estate. Silence.